I call this meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Robin Wheatley,
Here.
Peggy Kilberg,
Here.
Dave Shetland,
Here.
Beth Sires, Kaiser, sorry,
Here.
Don Sires.
Here.
Thank you, Beth. It looks like we need to approve the December minutes.
Those go through the top of the fourth page.
Yeah, it's the last.
It's the whole packet. Oh, okay, thank you. Wow, very thorough. Thank you. I move we approve.
Second.
Now we'll go around for a vote.
Oh.
Would you like to do a roll vote or would you like to do all together?
I don't care. What do I say? I don't know.
If you'd like to do it all together, just say all voting aye. Please raise your hands.
All voting aye, please raise your hand. Okay, it looks like it passes.
We typically you would say nay too, but that was unanimous, so that's fine.
I have some things I'd like to say. Does anyone else have anything? No?
I have one thought, but I'll save it till you go first because I missed the last meeting, so I'm catching up a little.
Yeah, after last meeting, when we had our guest, not all of us were here. We voted to not do a buffer. And after that meeting, not have a buffer as part of our criteria to send to the city council. And I was just thinking that I think we should revisit some of those, either buffer, caps. I looked over the white paper that Clay did, what some of the other cities have done. And I know I'm looking through here, Dundee, they did concentration limits, they did density base, they have a density based policy. So this is our nearby city. They're, they have a days of use policy, owner limitations. I think we should discuss that again. I know the planning commission's concerned about this. I think we should discuss it again. I think there's a large part of the community that wants to see us do something. I think if we don't do something, I don't think that's a good choice. If we do decide to do something, it's to go to city council and also to the community. If we, I would like to at least give the community a chance to weigh in. I think if we don't, all these other cities, Hood River, Lincoln City, they all have some sort of regulation. It looked like Oregon City was the only city that really didn't have any regulation. But I think there's enough people in the community who would like to see something. And if they don't, fine. We'll see what the city council says. We'll see what the rest of the community, because I think, Clay, we're planning on doing a community involvement survey presentation type thing where you're getting public comment. You want public
So yeah,
involvement?
so what staff is, once this committee's recommendation goes to city council, so staff will take that forward. But one of the comments that is going to come from staff is that if direction is given to staff to work on something, that it includes some level of public engagement.
Yeah.
So we're going to be recommending that. And that's really coming from more of a professional perspective and just the scope of work. This is usually a high profile enough thing, as you all know, because you chose to be involved in this, that people have opinions one way or another. And so I don't want it to blow up in the city's face, and neither does the rest of our department, because people say that there wasn't enough outreach done early in crafting the rules. So if you let people get in that conversation early rather than waiting to get into something like an adoption hearing, they're going to feel better about it, even if it goes a direction that they wouldn't have picked for themselves. They would have said, well, the process happened. So at a minimum, that's what we'll be suggesting.
Remind me, what does early look like? Is it before we take a recommendation to city council? We want to have public input?
In this case, the way that I would envision it anyway, is that This is already some level of public engagement, right? So we've invited a few members of the public to be on here in addition to some city councilors. So that step is happening kind of in what I think of as the pre-scoping, so that the council can decide what do they want staff to do, what direction do they want to give to staff. But then that early involvement, and my thinking of it when I say that, would be that the city council says, go forth, work on the project. We want you to consider these things, work on these things, bring them back. So give us essentially some goalposts that comes from the city council. But then that scope of work would include engagement happening at that time. Usually that's after the city council gives direction to staff, but before draft policies are written. Or we write up some draft policies and then go out to the public, get input on that of what the public thinks, and then bring that. So there are a few different ways you can approach it in the project timeline and where that happens. You can happen kind of earlier in the project and do it at the concept level, or you can do it at the draft document and draft text level.
But either way, it would be after we make a recommendation.
right. It would
This
be-
body
it
to
would
the
be-
city council.
Yeah, after this body makes a recommendation to the city council and after the city council gives direction to staff.
Thank you.
And that's only if the city council wants us to do that. If the city council says, no, we hate the idea, just do what we have asked you to do, then we could do that too. But the recommendation is still going to be there from staff that we think it would be in the best interest of the city to do that.
What kind of opportunity, what would that look like? Would you, for public, I mean, would it be
The-
like an open house or a virtual open house?
That's right. So it would probably be something like an open house, perhaps. So one of the ways to do it is kind of considering who you're trying to reach and what extent you're trying to reach them. So because virtual open houses have gotten relatively familiar, and particularly during 2020, people got kind of used to them. It's often nice to pair an in-person open house, so people have that opportunity to participate, with a virtual open house. So people that have trouble participating in person have a second opportunity. And then if we wanted to, we could do something that's a less formal open house type of method. So if it's the same questions, what we did for the parking management study was we also put an online form and circulated that through some of the city's social media channels and those sorts of things. So people could essentially do it as a survey, and it's the questions that we were asking people to give us input on at those open houses. We do ones that are supposed to be similar. They might not be exactly the same, but they ask similar questions to the public in the form of kind of an informal survey. And it's not, I wouldn't call it a survey, because surveys are trying to hit certain thresholds to verify that they're statistically valid for your population or your group or whoever you're working with. So, but it would just be another way of getting some input, essentially an online questionnaire. So those would be some of the options that I would consider as low-hanging fruit that don't have to be that hard or that time-consuming.
Would we help you formulate the questions, or is that something, if we voted on it, is
If
that something that? we
If
work with
council
you on?
wanted certain things to be answered as part of our outreach, that would be a great recommendation.
Or if we didn't, then you would just formulate the questions
Yeah.
based on what we've come up with.
Yeah, so the city council, in the direction they give us for that project, we would anticipate that we're probably gonna have to come up with questions to make the project work the way it's supposed to and getting those things answered. But if the city council thinks it would be important to hear X thing from the public on how they feel about this issue, that issue, or something like that, then that can be direction to staff, and we're happy to do that sort of thing. So we'll take those. And so that's really what staff would be looking for if we get direction from city council. And I keep putting this, if we get direction from city council, because city council could choose to say, we think it's fine as it is, don't do anything. And we just don't know what that's going to be.
Anyone else? Beth?
Two questions for Clay, just to refresh my memory. And I believe it's in your white paper, but I don't have it in front of me. What's the current number of residences in Newberg right now? Is it around 9,200? And then what's the current number of registered short-term rentals?
It's, so the number in the research paper, I believe, was 74 addresses or 74 units that are out there. And it is approximately 9,200 residences or households. Because I think if we recall from the memo or the statement we got from the police department, they referenced households. But I think that may have actually been a number that I gave them that's from the American Community Surveys last. So the Census Bureau does their American Community Survey. And so that's the population estimate for number of households in the city,
You said how many?
9,200.
about 9,200.
And what was 7,400?
not 7,400, just 74. 74 vacation rentals.
Oh, slight difference.
74, yeah, STRs. And those,
Police report says 73, or the police statement says 73.
70, they do say 73, and I talked to them about that because the research paper says 74, but they ran addresses. So it might be that on one address, there are somehow 2 vacation rentals or something like that.
Okay.
And I still don't know what that is. But good catch.
Just as a, I love, data. It's 8 thousandths of the short-term rentals are 0.008 of the total number of homes, not population number of households. So it's almost a 100th%. No, almost yeah.
my concern is watching the planning commission meetings. There's, a few streets in Newberg that they've just been decimated with the short-term rentals. There's maybe one home on it. Decimated, sorry, but I mean, could you imagine if you lived on a street and you didn't know anyone? So, no, best saying no. I think there's some people that would like to have a say. I mean,
I'll make a comment. I think we could go, there's 2 ways we can go with that. One was your idea of, the limits of 500 feet or whatever number it is. The other area is where we just set up a zone for all short-term rentals in this, section of the city. I don't think that's a kind of a ridiculous idea because I don't think it's viable. The latter, if you said, hey, we're going to designate a couple blocks of the city to be just short-term rentals, just like we would commercial property or retail property or a hotel, we'll just set up short-term rentals there. But that takes away from the idea of being able to rent your home, the whole original concept. And I would rather have them throughout the city. So my thought is, and I know I've had a lot of ideas, but I would say that I would support no restrictions on the number of nights something can be rented. I have no restrictions on the number of rentals somebody could own, but we would limit the total number of rentals in the city to 0.02% of the total households. So right now we have 74, 73, depending on how you want to count it, short-term rentals. If we went to 0.02% of 9,200 households, that would allow us to have 184 registered short-term rentals in the house, so in the city. So more than doubling what we have today, and all the people who had those could theoretically rent them as much as they wanted to within the year.
do you support a cap?
On the number of short-term rentals, yes.
So there's also, Dundee is doing, you can't own more than one and you can't have more than one on the same street.
I
I
don't see
believe.
why we wouldn't allow somebody to own more than one. I mean, if we're gonna, the original Hood River was in Lincoln City, maybe second, were the 2 cities I think that were leaders in addressing this. And the problem they had was investors snatching up properties, a large number of them. And so locals couldn't afford to live there. But if we put a cap on the number of rentals, if it's, for right now, say it's capped at 184, that allows a local person to buy, to add on their home. But it still prevents investors from taking over the city and buying a lot of short-term rentals. But I would defer to Beth and say, would you want to limit on how many you should own, or would you want to limit on who owns them?
Or none of the.
So I'll never own one, right? So I don't have a stake in that side of the business. You do, right? And so it doesn't, to me, I would prefer, if I had a say in it, that I wouldn't care if you own 20 of them, because you live here, right? I don't want BlackRock, who just bought 500 homes in one day in Las Vegas, buying up homes or, I just use their name because of what they're doing. They're snatching up hundreds and thousands of homes all over the country and turning cities into their slums. And I want Newberg citizens to, to have a city we want to live in. And I want the people who live here be able to do whatever they want with their homes. That's.
So I think that I like that balance between the two. And what I like most of all is the idea that we're looking towards the future, both for the growth of these short-term rentals and what we would call, I know it's a very nebulous kind of verbiage, but livability. And I apologize for my speaking. I have a problem going on where I don't have a lot of breath anymore. And so, and I think that is where I see this board's responsibility. And I love the diversity of thought that we have here. And this is the opportunity to not say winner take all. This is the opportunity to find some sort of middle ground that reflects all of this possibility. And frankly, what we will do here will certainly affect the next 20 years of Newberg's growth. And there's going to be a lot of growth here. And so this is a possibility. It is harder to rein something back in than to adjust it later. But as you're saying, if we leave ourselves vulnerable to large investment companies coming in, and I don't know whether they would or not, but this is a desirable location. If money is going to be made, I'd rather see it made locally, like you're saying, and flourish the growth of the community. And I know that's probably not landing on one side or the other with this, but again, the idea of matching all needs as best we can.
Well, to add to your point.
Yeah.
About growth, I think if we peg the limit at 0.02%, as the city grows, it allows us to add more short-term rentals, or allows people to bring in more short-term rentals. But, when we're at 74 right now, that limit seems pretty high.
The only other thing I would suggest in there is that the idea of in R1 and R2s, having them within a certain distance, it just kind of
Well, I
keeps,
still like that idea too.
yeah.
You're proposing a buffer, because we voted that down at the last meeting, but you're thinking that
I
We
am
should have a
suggesting that in the sense of in certain neighborhood areas. And it's not a matter, excuse me. I'm sorry. It's not a matter of, it still allows for growth into those areas. But it also keeps the sense of what that neighborhood is going to look like.
there's also something that we could consider, the person who needs to live in the community or have somebody in the community. I mean, we could prevent somebody like BlackRock coming in. Could we say that you have to be the homeowner in the community? Could we do that? Is that legal?
Some of the cases just had, either you live within it or live within live within 10 minutes, or within 10 miles, or within the zip code. So there, some of the cases do have different methods of.
And this has been, we've talked about this at the planning commission as well. And so some of it is that there was some concern about respect for private property rights and also the various situations that people might have living here and not living here. For example, people that travel as part of their job and this is a second home, or they have family in the area, or they've inherited a home, or things like that. So that is not to deter that sort of thing, but it does get into an ownership and excluding someone, something that one of the more productive things that I've heard this group talk about, and that I heard early on with some of the planning commission discussion, is figuring out exactly what problem you're trying to solve through some of the criteria that you're looking to do. So you talked about not knowing anyone on the street being a problem. And so I don't know, so the owner thing could get to some of that, but I would just ask that, or I would recommend that really think about what is the problem and how is it being solved? And does the tool that you're trying to apply actually solve it? The ownership one to me feels a bit messy or potentially exclusionary in a way that we're not really shooting for. So I would just caution that, although we do have some examples that did things around there, and home shares were one version of that where the homeowner is present. So that's one, but it does limit people being able to use it. And it's kind of one type of use for vacation rental homes.
So just kind of the three cases that we had from the paper were living within the UGB or within 10 miles. The owner or agent living within the zip code or local contact should be able to be physically present within 60 minutes while it's being rented. And then there were some comments that you guys had made in your responses to Clay. One being that the owner of the vacation rental should live at least 6 months in Newberg. They should reside within 10 miles at least 6 months of the year, and a property manager be available when the owners are not there. And those were the two.
I don't care where the owner lives. I don't care. I would not like an investor to come in and buy 100 properties for short-term rentals. Is there any way to, but I don't necessarily want to exclude investors altogether. I don't know how practical it would be to track who the owners are. Like, say an investor could have 1 or 2, but no more than that. So that sounds like a burdensome thing to enforce to me.
And it does, and I'd have a concern that someone just goes out and creates an LLC with a different name, frankly. So I feel like so it doesn't seem like it would require much sophistication to go around that, that sort of thing. So that would be one concern on how effective is the tool. One of the things that was just mentioned here, and by here, I mean, I'm looking at a chat between us, is that if there's a question, I believe, on whether it's buffers or caps and those things, some of those scenarios were presented in prior presentations. So if you wanted to see generally, what does that look like? So the cap, we created some with buffers that were, if you could fit this many in, what does that look like? And you can see generally, what does the density look like? Now, one of the things I would point out is if you do something like that, it doesn't get to the fact that when we looked at the kind of heat map from the research paper, unsurprisingly, people are picking things differently. So we're getting more vacation rentals closer to the downtown area, closer to George Fox and those sorts of things. So those areas that are really magnets for those sorts of things, the impact that they could see would be different if there's going to be an impact. And I think that's debatable on how much of an impact would occur. And some of the things too that we see in public comments, some have been comments where people say that they have experienced things, and others are comments where we see people are concerned that they will experience things. So they're concerned that those could happen in the future, but they haven't necessarily experienced it yet. And I don't want to say that that's not important. Those are important, but.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'm a little frustrated that we voted on it, had a majority, and now we have to come back and start over. The other thing is, I know there are people who genuinely are concerned, either have had experience or expect to. Many times the expect tos don't pan out like they think they will. The density is near downtown, which it makes sense in George Fox. I don't want to, I'm not interested in a buffer, just personally, if we vote. I like the idea of maxing it out. And the other thing to keep in mind is we can recommend to the council, take a look at this every 2 years and see where we're at. Are there new areas where it's high density, or what have the complaints been? That's the other issue with the homeowner. I don't care where they live, as long as the complaints get handled quickly. And if the tenants can't calm down and behave, then they're out. If they'll help enforce if the, the manager, property manager or whoever, whether it's the owner or paid manager, that's, I think, the problem that's being anticipated is we need somebody who's going to take care of problem tenants, renters for these short-term rentals. So either way, as long as they're taken care of, then I don't care who does it.
And that was part of our proposals was policies set that would give people, the community neighbors, power to make comment to the owner, and those problems could be addressed. I don't like the idea of a buffer. I don't like the idea of people's property rights being controlled like that. I know there's controls, but like that, I'm not a fan of that. And then I think about, well, what if these were all just rental houses? Would you have the same standards? Would you be expecting and demanding the same kind of ideas? You wouldn't, because we have rentals all around us. And I think one of the arguments I brought up in the very beginning was, if you have a bad tenant next door and in a rental house, they're there until they move away. If you have a bad tenant in a short-term rental, they're probably there for the weekend or, a week or whatever. And so they're gone. So problem is gone. As far as livability, I guess I could argue that having a high density in one location, that's what you expect. Yes, I have sympathy for the people who have lived in that neighborhood for a while and they're feeling, the tug of this new situation that's thrust on them. But I don't like the buffer because I don't like that idea of saying, no, you can't have one in this area or on this street. I don't like that idea. But I think the cap is a place I could give in, and as long as it was a situation that could be revisited, the cap could be increased, the cap could be held. And as long as there was a time frame in which the review and that there was a methodology for reviewing the situation to see if it's a problem or not.
I like the idea of a cap too. I mean, we can more than double the amount of homes. And I guess with me wanting to, I feel like there's people that have an opinion on it. I would at least like to give them a voice. If we don't put anything out there and they're like, they wouldn't even give us this option, I think we should at least put an option out there and see what people think.
That's what the questionnaire or open house.
Yes, but that would have to be something that our group tells them.
City council.
City council would have to tell us. And so what we're doing today is getting that recommendation so it can go to the whole city council as a decision-making body.
Yes.
That's why I'm saying, I think
Okay.
I think we should vote on, before we didn't want any limitations, no buffers, nothing. And I was thinking, okay, maybe I wanted to revisit that and at least it gives something to city council to possibly give out to the community.
It feels like you're being preemptive because you know the mood or attitude of the planning department. And that influence is being forced on our decision.
Well, I have seen them and I've listened to the letters. I mean, I can't ignore constituents. I think we should put that out there.
But by doing an open house or virtual open house with the questionnaire, we are putting it out there. We're a subcommittee making a recommendation to the city council. We can say we don't recommend any density controls. We do recommend it never be more than 0.02% of our total households. And we also would recommend some type of open house where citizens have a chance to give us their opinions. I think 95% of the city doesn't care. They aren't even aware of it. But we have a small number that is vocal, and that's their right. I'm often that way about certain topics, but yeah. So I think we're doing all of those things with our recommendation to the council. I don't think we have to stop and do it before it gets to the council.
So I like the cap idea. I think we should vote. Because before we didn't have a cap or any buffer or anything like that. I would like to take a vote and see what you guys think. Because I think that's very reasonable.
So let's assume we do cap.
Okay.
Let's assume we do cap only. And let's assume for a moment, for example, the housing over by the hospital that's opening up. And with that cap only and no distance, almost all of those could be set up as vacation rentals under that concept.
Possible.
Potentially.
I think it's very
Correct.
likely.
Well, so I think that, again, this is where I just want to emphasize that. Remember, when we don't know what population is in favor or not in favor, all we know is that certain people have voiced one way or the other. And so the question is how can we be preemptive to allow this to grow, to allow it to grow in an intelligent way, as opposed to just throwing seeds out everywhere and having it could radically change neighborhoods that we don't want to have it that look. And so that's all I'm really thinking about. How do we do this in a way that allows it to grow and allows the city to grow and have that atmosphere that makes this an incredibly desirable town to be in?
If I may, I wanted to add two things. So the one, if you all would like, we can read the ones that we heard from last time that you kind of got concurrence on from each other. And so we can list those so that instead of kind of taking this topic in isolation, it's kind of in the whole and kind of refreshes on those. And everyone may have this and we might not need to read it, and that's fine. But the other part I wanted to mention is, so Dave, I think that you said that that was it 0.02%. So what I'm getting is that I think it's with 9,000. So the police memo was 9,177 households. And so I think that 1% would be 91.77 households. But maybe I'm getting something wrong from what you had said.
2% is 0.02, but it's not 0.02%.
Yeah, right.
Is that? I wanted to get on the same page.
8%.
Well, that's why I wanted to bring it up as I might be doing something wrong on my side.
If we're listing
So how many, what's the total?
So 1% of the total number of households in the city would be 91.77. And then I think right
So
now,
it'd be 2%. Not 0.2%. I was multiplying that point. Yeah.
Okay.
But 2% cap was the 182.
right. And so currently at 74 active properties, that's approximately 0.806%. So it's a little under 1%.
And by the way, and Beth would know this better than me, right now, I don't know if we, based on the occupancy of, having 74, I don't think there's a market for 183.
And it's a self-leveling market.
Right.
That's the beauty of investment properties, whether it's a long-term rental or short-term rental. If it's not necessary, it won't be rented. By short-term, it'll be turned into a long-term or it will be sold.
Right. And so anyway, my point is, I don't want to limit the market. I don't want to limit your ability to make an income. I just want to put a cap to prevent it from getting out of control at some point and unforeseen in the future. It might take us, the city, 20 years to hit 183. And then how many homes would we have in the city by then?
So based on the applications that are coming in, is there a trajectory that you can imagine how quickly we might reach the 184?
If it were steady, so we're getting, at the planning commission, we're typically seeing 2 or 3 applications completed a month. So that would put us at 24 to 36 a year. And so if we're at 74 now, getting to 186, I'm not punching into a calculator, but that sounds like
It's about
3
5 or
years.
6 years, but that's
5 or
also
6 years.
assuming that everybody renews,
And that the city doesn't grow.
right? Right, and that the city doesn't grow, right? How many homes are we adding every year? So presumably, as the city gets bigger and we have more of a need for short-term rentals, that number is going to continue to go up. I don't see us, even best case, hitting that cap for 10 years or more.
So that. Looking forward, both the investment product growth and community. And I think we're also addressing, I'm sorry.
Your mic
No.
isn't on, Don.
I only have 2 brain cells left, you guys. I should. What, I have a health condition going and it's, it's pretty severe and I'm working through it. Anyway, let me see, get back to 1 brain cell I had. And it does say to the community that the city is very aware of this growth. And I think that's an important thing. Thank you.
I like that. I like that it says that we're listening to people, we're mindful of it, but yet we're still respecting private property, which is very important to people. But also my only concern that we should, I guess we'll get your opinion on, are the areas that are, I said decimated before, but the ones that are very dense. There's 1 person living on the block and the rest are vacation rentals. What do you guys think about that?
It just, as you guys dig into the cap idea, I just like kind of thinking about the broad things kind of in policy, there's always the potential to kind of intersect things, right? So you could say a cap for the whole city, or R1, R2 has come up in different conversations. So cap 1 for the R1 and R2 zones, cap 2 for X zones. That, or you've also talked about making all the vacation rentals a type 2, right? So that could make more people want to apply if it's an easier process. So is it a type 2 until the cap's reached, and then if you want to do over the cap, then it's type 3. So just thinking about
I'm
as you
trying
dig
to
in-
make it,
dig
my
into
thought
the
is
cap,
keep it simple.
as you dig into the cap, like there are different ways to address location or like speed of, so just, yeah, that's all.
It's a good point, but Robin and I were talking about this a couple days ago, and I think you made the comment, and I'm paraphrasing here, but how do you track something like that? Right, and whose burden is it to track that? I think it's pretty easy for somebody approving a request to look at, hey, we've got this many right now and we've got this many homes, okay, we're under. But you start putting in all these other conditions, it makes it harder and, not impossible, but I'm not here to put burdens on city workers. And regulations. I'd like it to be as easy as possible for everybody.
And with that, I know we mentioned it, but I just want to state it again. Every 2-year review, to me, that allows for greater or less
you guys feel about a cap in an R1 or a certain area like the downtown by George Fox? Those are the really popular areas. How
I
do you
lean
guys feel?
against it. I just think it'd be too hard to manage.
Ditto.
Right, I'm opposed to it. Not because it's hard to manage, just because it's infringing on property owner rights.
So do we need to vote to add the cap? Cause do we need to vote to add that to the list?
That's what this body did the last time on the other round, so it would make sense to me, but it's really amongst yourselves and what you want to do.
But do we want to add that? We want to
Yes.
add a cap?
It seems like there's a consensus.
Okay.
Why don't you make it?
Yeah, I move that we put a 2% cap on the number of vacation rentals compared to the number of households in Newberg.
And do you need to put in that every 2 years it'll be revisited?
I was gonna make it a separate motion.
Okay.
I don't have to.
Yeah, I can second that.
All in favor?
Discussion.
Oh, discussion.
Do we-
Oh.
I thought we did discuss it.
Yeah.
So Peggy, are you planning to do a motion for the 2-year review?
So we voted on the first one.
Okay, no, we are having
Okay,
discussion.
gotcha.
Okay, all in
Discussion.
favor of adding a 2% cap?
Aye.
Aye, so. Okay, the
Okay.
cap passes.
I'm always in a minority.
Stand your
cool.
ground.
I just want to say after that cough, I am not contagious.
Do we want to discuss the 2-year revisit in 2 years?
I have a question for Clay or James. Is that a big burden on you folks there to do a 2-year? Do you think it's too long, too short?
No, the 2 years, probably about right. The only hesitation I would have is biannual. You have the opportunity to forget what year you're on, but hopefully we're on top of it and it's not a big deal. And the reason I say that is if you think about things like when I look at our street seats program, that has been something where it's every 2 or 3 years at a time. And sometimes it kind of sneaks up on people because it's not an annual task. And we've had, unfortunately, in the city, kind of a staff turnover issue that makes it a little more dangerous. But all in the past, we're doing great. James isn't going anywhere. We've chained him to his desk. Same with Faye. You just can't see it. We keep him very hidden. No, I think a biannual review is fine, especially if we think about this year, we did a bigger lift than normal, partially because the one previous had been light. And it felt like we were getting a lot of comments and that the planning commission they were feeling uncomfortable. And so we felt it was kind of on us to do a little bit more and it's turned into a bigger discussion, but I don't think it's one we'll have to have every year. If it's a biannual review of the cap, and that will kind of let us do a general high-level assessment of short-term rentals. One of the other things that's in here too, is there are a number of compliance/enforcement mechanisms that have been in place. And so hopefully we'll get a better figure on how many are really there. Because as we stated in the short term, in the research paper, is we have the data that we have. We don't have any information on the data that we don't have, which is those that operate and haven't gotten a business license, haven't gotten a permit, and aren't paying TLT. So those we don't know. So once we start doing some of these other recommendations, if these get incorporated into by city council, then we may find that the number is not exactly what we think it is today. And we'll just see. And it could change very little, or it could change quite a bit. And I have no idea because I just don't have that information.
When I was talking about a 2-year review, I was thinking of whatever the council passes. All aspects of this, not just
just cap.
the max. Yeah, the cap.
So you think 2 years is good, not 1 year? Cause I kind of like to know data. Is that too soon? Cause we're asking for a lot of compliance things in 2 years, but I'd kind of like to know what we've accomplished in a year, but is that too much?
The city council can always give us direction to do whatever you all want, but if there is an ongoing every 2 years, I would say that's pretty doable. Every year could be a bit of a lift to kind of do an audit of the program.
Cause we're just, yeah, cause we're just implementing it and then in a year, okay. yeah.
But if the council after it assigns work, gets work that it likes, adopts new standards, if it says, let's say the 2-year review stays in there in perpetuity, say, we're keeping the 2-year, but in 1 year, we want an update on what did you see? So that maybe isn't an update every year, but an initial update, just to say,
Like that.
did the needle move? That would be fine.
I like the 1-year review and then what would happen the biannual, what would that?
I think it would be either, it's all dependent on what the city council really wants and what strategically, maybe the biannual review starts 2 years after that 1-year update. Or maybe it starts the year after the 1-year update. It really just depends on what the council wants.
I would think that 2-year review would obviously give us how many short-term rentals we have. It would take a look at how many people are now registered with business license permits and the TLT, what's changed there, whatever else we implement into the code, then we should get a check back on it after that first year, because that's going to be kind of a pain for staff, but I think it's a good marker. And from there, I think we should go forward every 2 years. And we couldn't even, I would be inclined to say at least every 2 years, and more frequently if the city council deems it advisable, something, I don't know what that would look like but that we would, if we became aware of a big spike in rentals or I don't know. We could see if there was anything that became problematic. We would have the option of looking at it more frequently, but generally I think 2 years would be the timeframe.
And with that, I think that one of the ways of acknowledging that is if we suddenly see a spike in applications, then the board that is overseeing that can bring that to the attention of the city council.
I think as one of the recommendations, I think, was to take it off of the planning commission in general and just make it staff.
Well, how will we know if there's a spike? We won't know.
We can get updates on.
That'd be something as the updates come through, or if for some reason there are public comments that are coming to city councilors, you can always ask for an updated numbers. That's something that staff can provide. So for example, even if it came up today that you had someone who was some counselor that was really getting something about, or just a member of the public that said, I would like to know how many applications did you process each year for the last 5 years? That is not necessarily the hardest thing for us to find. And if we had a program that was prepared to do those calculations, it's even more likely we'd have some kind of a query to do that more readily. And luckily, every once in a while doing a research paper like the one that's been done recently lets us see that stuff. So that's in the short-term rental paper. We looked at permits, number of permits by year. That's a good thing. So that gives us some trend lines to look at. And it has gone up since 2020 and has stayed up since then.
We do have a participant on Zoom who had a question. And it was about the buffer. And it's from Chris Wright, who is on the planning commission. And she actually had asked if about considering adding a distance buffer to the grade schools in Newberg for safety issues.
I don't know that we've had any issues around schools. I know that question has been raised by a citizen. I've got an email from a citizen concerned about that, but I don't think we don't have any information from the police that is a problem.
That's correct. What the police statement did was look at the various complaints that had been received at properties that are known to be vacation rentals and see if those appear to differ from other properties throughout the city. And the overall answer was no, did not. And they kind of broke down those various ones at the kind of level of what sorts of complaints they were receiving.
I think the city would have to make a change in policy allowing homeless shelters near schools prior to being concerned about short-term rentals near schools.
I do believe, when a short-term rental is booked, that person's information, where they live, all their personal history is there. So if there is an issue, the police can locate that person. So it's, yeah.
I think regular residents could be a threat to our kids too, but we wouldn't know until something happened because we don't do background checks on people who rent or, well, probably rent, but not buy homes. So I don't think there's a greater risk for short-term vacation renters than the general population.
I would agree.
Thank you for your question, Chris. You want to do a motion on the review period? I kind of would like to know in a year or so how many people have come into compliance, and that just kind of a rough idea, and then maybe in another year, look at it more in depth, or 2 years. But I kind of like to know in a year how things are progressing, if our policies, have done any.
So I'm hearing that there's an interest for a year one post-adoption review with city council or update, call it whatever we want. And then a biannual update to continue following adoption by city council. And so staff don't have any problem with that. That's fine.
And that review encompasses not only the cap, but the policies, the policy changes that we're making.
I so move what Clay said.
Second. Then we vote on it. All in favor? Okay. It passes unanimously.
I had a question for Clay. Previously, we talked about requiring the websites or operators, VRBO, Airbnb, whoever, to collect the TLT taxes. Is that part of the plan? Do we need to vote on that?
Let me see if that's in. That might be one of the ones that was voted on last time.
I didn't see it in here.
Second to last page.
Is it? Okay.
This just started.
So I'll go through, I do have that on my list, and I can go through all the other ones that I have on my list if that's helpful.
Could you do a review of everything that
Yeah.
we've discussed?
And that way if,
Oh, here it is. I see it. Item 6.
okay, so what I have, and I'm not working off the minutes, I'm actually working off of my notes from last time. So if I miss anything, hopefully James and Faye can also let me know if they want to, or anyone of this group. So I've got related to the number of vacation rentals, and this wouldn't be really all related to them, but so we'll call it general reporting. A year one post-adoption update with city council, as well as a biannual short-term rental program update to continue. Regarding the number of vacation rentals, a citywide cap of no more than 2% of the households can be vacation rentals in the city of Newberg. Regarding the process or procedures, making all short-term rental applications type 2 procedures. Having vacation rental permits run with the owner rather than run with the land. Having an annual noticing requirement that the adjacent property owner is notified regarding contact information. And that would be sent to the applicant. This is a recommendation that the applicant be sent so that it occur in some conjunction with the business license affirmation was discussed. Some grandfathering policies that required amortization, including application for a permit within 60 days and obtaining a permit within 1 year. That it allow continued non-conforming use for vested interest without adherence to special criteria and definition of vacation rental use category if in operation prior to December 7th, 2023, which was our last meeting date. allow continued non-conforming use for vested interest without adherence to special criteria, and I think that's probably special use criteria. I just might have left that out of my notes. And definition of vacation rental homes use category if in operation prior to December 7th, 2023. So that was the idea that there are probably those that are currently non-conforming. So they occur in something that doesn't fit the definition of a vacation rental home, like they don't occur in a single family home. And those that wouldn't fit under today's special use criteria standards, but they've already been operating. And we didn't want to, the discussion was that you didn't want them to have to necessarily stop as long as they got into compliance as required. So kind of allowed non-conforming use. So I think the example that we discussed at the last meeting was Yamhill, was it Yamhill Flats? That's across from City Hall. So those are apartment buildings and that folks were familiar with. It appears that they are listed somewhere. But right now we don't have a requirement to amortize. So those two ones that are under the grandfathering policies were kind of complementary to each other. It required amortization, but it said if you're an existing non-conforming use, you could get a permit to allow you to continue operating, but you can't make it any bigger. And if you stop, you don't get to start again.
Continue operating.
To continue.
In the-
If you're already doing it. So you're not trying to take away from people, but you don't want people to exacerbate it either.
Another example, let's say there's one somewhere in town that doesn't have any parking requirements.
Right. And but they're already doing it.
Right.
So it was considered non-conforming.
And we're going to ask them to pay.
They'd have to get permitted and they'd
per-
have to kind of get right with the standards. But they could continue the use because it would be considered a vested interest that they've already been doing this and we don't want to create a hardship situation.
And we're saying they were operating without anything, and we're saying, we found out that you're doing this, we're asking you to
It's-
comply, but we're
it's
not gonna
hard-
make you do the.
We're not gonna shut it down.
Right.
Okay.
The part of the issue, I think, was even if they applied today, we wouldn't be able to approve it. But there's a provision in our current standards that says if you were in operation prior to the regulations that were adopted in 2013, you could just continue operating in perpetuity. But that creates a compliance issue for us because we don't really have documentation that readily allows us to verify that someone did those. But if we said, you can do we can allow a continued non-conforming use, but you have to get a permit under that provision, and you have to show us that documentation. So those go together, that amortization as well as allowed continued non-conforming use.
Which encourages them to come forward.
Yeah, you want them to, they have to get right with the system. And that way, that's how you bring them into following the rules like everybody else.
Just to
James,
be
did you have
clear,
something?
they get the permit to continue operating even while they're in non-conformance, but they're also come under the amortization requirement that they work toward
Mhm.
getting adequate parking or whatever they are.
This is what I have in my notes, and I suspect that James was wheeling around the corner to help me maybe look at the minutes. Or maybe he was gonna tell us what they say in case I was out of context.
Well, it was just something about 90-day. So the minutes have a 90-day compliance period.
The minutes are right.
And the phrasing there is either getting permitted, signing up to pay TLT, getting a business license, or combination of these requirements. And that if a grandfathered VR is not conforming to the current code requirements, they will still need to get a permit, but it can be approved as a non-conforming use if their operation prior.
I think in my notes, I broke it into two things, and in the minutes, it sounds like it's one big thing.
So it,
So you've got house A over here. It doesn't have parking. They've been doing it for a long time. They're going to fill out their license, become compliant to that, but they don't have, because let's say there's no way they can have parking. I'm understanding you to say they're never gonna be made to have parking. Right,
They could operate as they've been operating,
correct, all right, thank you.
but they have a window in which they need to get right. And after that, that window closes.
It sounds like you're saying two opposite things. When you say they have a window at which they need to get right, what do you
Mhm.
mean by getting right?
Getting their permits, getting registered for TLT, and getting a business license.
Oh, okay, but not.
But-
Sorry, yeah.
But that within the window, the city can approve the non-conforming. But outside the window, if they were to then come and say, I want to apply, is that correct? Then we would deny it because it doesn't meet the standards.
So my question is, what happens after that 90-day window?
They're out of luck.
And is that when?
What does
when
the
these
city do?
penalties Would theoretically come into play?
The compliance enforcement ones. I don't have a copy of that in front of me. Thank you though. So that's where some of the compliance enforcement would start. They could be penalized for those things, or those would start occurring. And those aren't necessarily targeting those individuals. These are for any folks who are not in compliance. And so there are those other ones that we have listed in the minutes under those.
Didn't we discuss, or did we discuss the window for people to be permitted and to that whole circle diagram thing? Were we gonna have a time period for, or what the repercussions would be?
Yeah, and so those are some of those. And I'm a little concerned about going back and forth between the minutes and my notes because they're formatted differently. I tabled them completely differently, but let's see. With the owner, it's land.
I think, would it be valuable to, like, as you were reading through this, to kind of get a sense of all the list and then just think about the list and does these things address the problem? Like thinking about the amortization and the fines together, like,
Enforcement, I see here.
does our whole list collectively address the problem you five want to address?
It's the second to last page.
Mhm.
I'm fine with everything on here. And with the 2% cap.
Yeah, so it would basically be the items that are in the minutes as the group had agreed to them, plus the 2% cap, plus the year one post-adoption update to city council, plus the biannual short-term rental program update.
Okay. Sorry.
Just that one thing. So I spoke with a representative from Airbnb a few weeks ago. They had reached out to the planning department, just that's their small government guy who talks about. And just to note, he mentioned that unless the city puts the mandated collection of taxes into the code, they won't do it.
We need to.
Yeah, yes. But just to clarify, like it's not like, oh, Airbnb should do it. Like if it's not in code, they.
No,
will
I'm
not do
definitely
it.
saying we need to make it code.
Yeah,
and-
yes,
and
yes, that just-
For any operator to be here, Airbnb or whoever, they need to collect the taxes. And follow-up question on that. And maybe it's in here somewhere else. What's the status on you were looking at some software that would administer the whole program?
We have not looked at it a whole lot closer, and so I think was it what the cost would be?
No, just in general, I was just
Oh.
wondering how the whole thing's progressing.
I haven't had time to talk to a whole lot of people on software options. Based on the number of folks that have basically sent me hey, we'd like to talk to you about our product, there are plenty of options out there. So when the article went out in the news, in the graphic a few months ago about that, within 2 weeks, I was getting on several different lists. So I think there's plenty of options for software for us to select from. So I don't really have any qualms about it.
Okay, I mean, I support that idea.
Yeah.
You know, I definitely think we should pursue that. And if you want, I'd be happy to help you evaluate or even put together an RFP.
Well,
Write it.
and so
No, not writing any code.
I appreciate that. And one of the things that may come up, and so this is for general consideration, especially for the committee members who are city councilors, is that this committee or a version of this committee could be asked to continue as an advisory body to the project if the city council wants. We don't necessarily need a technical advisory body because it's not that big. But if there wanted to be some guidance or they wanted to kind of add additional folks, almost like a focus group to go through early drafts or to provide early, we don't typically provide things to the public that we provide to some people and not others, but they could be a designated advisory group. That's actually common in particularly large projects. So that's something that we could do, or we could certainly have essentially committee members that are interested in sitting in some of the programmatic changes that aren't necessarily code, but they're programmatic on how would this work for residents. So something to consider. I don't necessarily want to give residents a whole bunch of homework that they're not being paid for and they're doing for funsies. But if they're offering to assist, there's ways that we could potentially do that. So, and it could be this committee, it could be something else altogether.
I think Dave's offer's awesome and we should take him up because of his technical background. But I think you might mention that idea to the mayor and leave it up to him whether he wants to ask some part of this committee, and whether it be Robin and or me or broader, to serve advisory as we go. I don't know that we want 5 people digging into the wording and giving you feedback. You know what I mean? Could get cumbersome and non-productive.
And the other thought to that is if we do something like an RFP, as I think about this, it's actually relatively common for us to have evaluation committees on RFPs and things like that. So like when we did the parking management study, we had some local stakeholders from the downtown area, because they have a vested interest, participate in the RFP evaluations. So this wouldn't be particularly different. We could just do it a little earlier before we send out the RFP. We could potentially get some stakeholder input to make sure we've composed it in a way that makes sense. And then we could help have that few stakeholders that have expressed interest potentially help us with selecting someone that's appropriate and make sure they don't have obviously a conflict of interest, but have a background that could be helpful for the city.
Okay, I have 2 thoughts. The getting the software is going to cost the city money. But yet collecting the TLT, will we get to use that money to pay for the software? So is it a self-financing endeavor, or is it going to cost the city money? And I have one more thing.
So we can certainly look into what the code section, so it's Title III is finances for the city. And so there's a section for transient lodging taxes. And so we can look and see if that would be an allowable use. And if it is, we could talk about that. And that's something that I'm sure we could engage our finance department and make sure that figure out what is an allowable use. And because it's related to vacation rentals and tourism, would that be appropriate? And it seems like there's a thread there. I'm just not intimately familiar enough to know if that would be a good use. But, the TLT is used for certain things that the city has come to agreements with, like the visitor center and those sorts of things, and our destination marketing organization that we use. So there's an opportunity to do that. And I think that's a good recommendation.
The
Wait.
second thing.
Go ahead. Finish your thought and then I'll.
The second thing is when the discussion about outside investors coming in. So in the report that gets done in a year, it would be kind of nice to know what the demographic of the investors is or are, so that we can see if that's becoming a problem. And knowing whether we need to do any active action against that.
What would that look at the address of the applicant versus the location of the short-term rental?
Maybe it looks at the LLC that purchases, for example, and do a track what, their business license and who they're a sub business of and so on. Yeah, just to see, if we're concerned about that, which it sounds like there could be a legitimate reason to query that.
Okay.
And does that need to be added to these recommendations in any way so that you're prompted to look at that? That's a sensible question.
I'm just trying to keep track of these things on my side. And I think that if the group wants that to definitely explicitly be part of the recommendation to the city council, we can do that. I'm trying to figure out also a way to, so that your group, if you wanted to, because I heard it from multiple people, that there's an interest in kind of putting a bow on this so it can move to city council potentially following this meeting. And I'm just trying to make sure that we're gonna be capable, because it's easy for us to lift the things out of the, basically out of the minutes, add those items that you've already motioned. That one we can do as part of the year one. Would that be part of the year one update or the biannual? Or would that be a to be determined, the numbers?
Yeah, I'm just a little concerned about the burden on staff. I'm concerned. I don't think it's a huge risk, but we don't want to find out 2 years later that some company came in and bought 20 short-term rentals. But I also don't want you to have to spend an onerous amount of time and effort to track that stuff. Is it just all in the permit?
It's gonna be in the permit data, so that's the sort of thing that we could probably run a query on if we needed to at any given time. So that's why I kind of asked what would we picture that including? So we always have in our permits the situs where the thing occurs. And then we have applicant information, and then we have typically we have owner information as well. And sometimes our owner information is in a different data layer. But those are things that I think we could join that information if we had to upon request. So it might be one of those two that, would we see something in year one? Probably not. Would we see something in year two? Probably not. Would we start, if some things start getting a little funny at some place, or one of our reports starts showing, oh, there's been a significant uptick. Maybe we want to evaluate things, and that's a concern, then we could target that, but it doesn't necessarily have to be part of it every single time. It could be. I mean, I'm trying to think of, without it having been designed fully, it's hard for me to say, but could we do a query like that today? Yeah, we probably could if we were asked to, because it's in the database somewhere.
Can you, on the city website, put the names of all the applicants? Kind of like business owners, list of business owners or businesses that are local. And then people like me that are curious can do the investigation.
The curious can already get those because they're subject to a public records request, and every single one has a web page. Are they aggregated into a single, easy to access, simultaneous spreadsheet? No, absolutely not. But if staff are asked to like create a report, those are things that we can do. Those usually come from city council. Honestly, I don't even know if we have a fee item for if someone asks for a specialized research query. I'm not sure how we would build that out or fulfill that, but are we able to conduct research? Yes, we can. If a typical member of the public asks us how to do that, I'd have to figure out how we make sure that they pay for the staff time that's used for it if it's more than a typical information response.
Just occurred to me that I meant to make the motion with regard to the initial 1 year post-adoption review, and then 2 after. At least is what I would like to insert there, at least every 2 years. And we can either leave it at that, or maybe we should say, and more frequently if the city council deems it advisable. If we leave it at least, I think we leave that open without having to add all those words, however.
So just to clarify, so is the 2 year, does that envision like a development code amendment every 2 years if things need to be changed, or is it more of like an ad hoc committee forums and they discuss, I guess, kind of what's the framework of, is every 2 years we're expecting the code of short-term rentals to change, or is it more of a like that the 2 year framework sets the discussion, and then the discussion can evaluate what's needed? Yeah, I guess saying, because a code amendment, it could take a year on its own to do the code amendment itself. So yeah, I just don't know how they stack as far as timelines.
I think that clarification request is probably a good one from a staff perspective. My understanding when I heard it, Because I wasn't going that because it would be a lot for us to do a code amendment every 2 years or what have you. So mine would be that we are evaluating the activity metrics and bringing that to the council. There might be a mapping exercise involved too.
And the 1-year initial review would only be after the council had passed the new code resolutions or whatever we pass ordinances to change the code. So it wouldn't have to be like all messy and intermingled.
Right.
But I envision just a report from staff every 2 years. And then if something in the report triggered concern, then we could decide what to do then, but not to create a huge project or committee every 2 years.
Okay, that would be staff's understanding too.
But if, let's say in 2 years, we've met our cap way sooner than we thought. Do we,
Then
is
the
that a
reports
whole,
are going to be short.
well, is that a whole new code thing? Is that a whole,
And if the cap is determined to be appropriate and the cap is hit, then the cap is hit. So that's the thing. That is the point of the cap. And so it will, in theory, it will have done what it's supposed to. Now, if that's determined to be constraining people excessively and people don't like it, then that would give the opportunity, the council would be advised, you have this many and you have this many because you're at a X percentage of your cap, and that would be 100%. And you just, the council get to figure out how they feel about it at that time. And they could choose to say, the cap's just right, it's doing what we want it to do, or maybe this was too low.
I don't know if it's something that this body needs to decide, but like, as things might move to the code amendment for like for the planning, like, something could get built into the code of a mechanism to, you know, I guess I mean, don't know how detailed that code of a cap would get, but like, I mean, you know, it could in theory say.
Should be
okay,
simple, 2% of the total number of households. Households go up,
Yeah.
the number of rentals go up.
Percentage takes care of that.
So it actually never ends because there's probably going to always be new housing coming on board. And so it's kind of like a rolling 2%, you know, it just keeps on going.
That would be a good question for someone in Lincoln City. So certain communities, it grows faster, right? And to the point that was made earlier, the market should regulate. So at some point, depending on how you've calibrated it, it could be going up, it could be going up, and then it just gets saturated and it just stops, or maybe starts coming down. Because it's possible that people have put them in places that they just aren't as popular as they expected. Or that the tourism trends are that, you know, that we used to like doing Airbnbs, but now we kind of like the hotel experience because we hear there's a new hotel in town or whatever, stuff like that. So it really can vary. And if the theory that you're working off of is the market will do this, however, the market doesn't necessarily care for all of the externalities that come with visitation and things on the neighborhood street. So we're going to put a cap there to make sure that it doesn't get out of hand. And so that's what you've done. And what I heard was setting a cap, but not so low that it's immediately constraining folks, but high enough, but also not so high that it would run into a problem where we know that there are problems in certain neighborhoods. So at this point, we're at about 0.8 of 0.8% And so we're at less than 1%, but it gives enough wiggle room for a significant amount of growth or accidentally capturing people who we don't know about yet.
I have 2 questions, just kind of procedural. Would it be helpful to have us vote to include in our recommendation that the city mandate collection of TLT by Airbnb, VRBO, and property managers? Is it already done?
That one's
mandate?
already included.
Oh, yes. So any vacation, sorry. Okay. Then the other one, would you like us to include a recommendation that software be purchased, evaluated to what's the word? Enable? Enable, efficient collection of the permitting business, TLT, et cetera.
So that was included too. So actually I can keep going through the list on that, just makes, but it's basically from the minutes. Yep, 5 under compliance enforcement. No, it's just that you guys had a pretty long meeting the last time you met. So you covered a lot of these and it was a while ago because of some flooding. Ice Storm 2024. Yeah, so the other ones we have that I haven't gotten to and kind of listed out yet included increasing the penalties for non-compliance, first offense $2,000, second offense at $5,000. Some compliance and enforcement related ones, including requiring the neighbor to send out good neighbor notification with contact information upon approval and annually. And this could be tracked through the business license renewal process. To mandate the vacation rental companies collect and remit TLT taxes. And there would be an exception for self-operated vacation rentals. 3 under that one, change penalties for running a permit or running a vacation rental without a permit to first offense $2,000, second offense $5,000. I don't know. So they're usually coded based on some other, kind of it goes to a different portion of the code about what category of offense it is. Okay, James is gonna look it up for us.
So right now, for the land use permit side, it is a penalty not exceeding $500. Each day of a continuing violation constitutes a separate violation. For the business license, it's not exceeding $100. Each day of the continuing violations constitutes a separate violation. And then for TLT, if you're 10 days late, it's a 10% penalty. If you're 45 days late or more, it's a 15% penalty plus interest of 5% of the amount per month. So they're more kind of rolling penalties for the land use and business license and more of a amount base for the TLT.
So what we have written here is a flat fee. Is that more likely to be collected than a daily fee, a $500 daily fee? Did I hear that?
I guess I also to clarify that these are both the penalties just for the land use permits in general, not just for vacation rentals. So if there's a land use penalty, it's that fee. So I guess that's just clarifying that this is a broad.
So and some of this, the other part that I would mention, we may have mentioned it before. We have one code compliance officer for the whole city. And if we get notified that there's a violation, it's not like planning isn't doing it. It goes to code compliance. And so I don't know how aggressively this would be pursued as a topical area. I don't know if planning would be asked to have a code compliance aspect. Some jurisdictions do something like that, where they have those. I mean, some jurisdictions have condition compliance officers and they do similar things to code compliance officers. And so there could be some talk about that, and we would probably need to talk to and coordinate with the police department regarding code compliance about what the right way is. And this can still stay as a recommendation. And maybe the police department will have comments on it when it moves forward. Maybe they'll say, we would like you to stick with what we use, but we would be agreeable to pursuing this more proactively or what have you, especially if there is a software solution to help pay for it or something like that. So, but doesn't hurt my feelings. But we do have something, there could be interpreted as perhaps a level of redundancy, but it brings up the conversation about at least increasing the penalties or making sure they occur to encourage people to do what they're supposed to. So. So let's see, mandate that vacation rental companies collect and remit, exception for cell phone, I think, okay, so we were past that. Use the See-Click Fix app to track complaints from neighbors, so be outside of the police department. City using software to track compliance for all aspects of vacation rentals. And then there's the grandfather and amortization that my notes said one thing and this says one that's slightly different. So I'll go with what the minutes have to say. 90-day period to come into compliance, either getting permitted, signed up to pay TLT, get a business license or a combination of the requirements. And then kind of a subsection of that is if a grandfathered vacation rental is not conforming to the current code requirements, they will still need to get a permit, but it can be approved as a non-conforming use if they're in operation prior to year to be specified by staff. If the vacation rental does not come into compliance with the period, the vacation rental is deemed non-compliant and a penalty will come into play. And I believe that would be if the vacation rental does not come into compliance within the kind of when it says within the period, it means that 90-day period that was provided. It's kind of given as that what we referred to earlier as a window. And then That's the list. Very thorough.
I just want to make one comment and just about you were asking about cost of the software. And I just want to make a comment for the record that, and I say this working for a software company. Any software that the city buys, the cost of it should be covered by increased TLT and reduction in city employee hours, administering permits, collecting taxes, all of that. And so, I don't think that TLT taxes alone should pay for it. It shouldn't be a net zero. It should be a net positive
Mhm.
for the city. And I'm not familiar with the software. I don't know how much it costs. I would assume they meter it either by transactions or number of rentals. But point being is that if it costs more than TLT taxes, then we should stick with what we're doing. It's my 2 cents.
Thank you. And I think that's very logical. And I think there's certainly efficiencies to be gained by it. So from a staff perspective, I don't really have any fear of bringing on a new software that's going to help us with compliance. Because as the short-term rental paper points out, we're pretty certain there are operators out there that we don't know about. And we just don't have the tools to do anything about it. So this is a new tool, a big tool in the toolbox for making sure that people are following the rules.
So what's our next step to vote this to the city council?
If this group is satisfied with what has been discussed thus far, what has kind of been voted in and we have in the minutes, and that we've talked about with the kind of finite additions from today, then staff is comfortable taking that as the recommended actions to city council. And we can either go directly to city council or bring you back to see how we captured it and memorialized it. But I think that we can get it there without any significant problems. And if there is any committee member that feels that we didn't get something right, then you can send your thoughts to the chair who's on the city council and she can share those. So I think that would be a way to move it along so we can put a bow on this.
Would another way work for you to send your draft to all of us and we send our input back to you? So we don't have a serial meeting. If you send it out BCC, and if we thought, oh, I think this might be an error, or what about this? I don't know.
I think that we can do that. I'm just trying to make sure I'm not going around any meeting laws accidentally, because that would not be my objective. Yeah, I think that would be fine. We can send something that is a draft of the recommendations. And then if it seems that it deviates from what you expected to see, then again, that would be sent out to all of you BCC'd. You'll respond to staff. If there's something there you don't expect to see, or you don't remember having occurred, then please let us know. And then that recommendation can move forward.
I only suggested that to make it more streamlined. If it's not, then forget it. We can do what you suggested.
Yeah, that's all it would be. It would just be to verify that it's there. But as a committee of this, so trying to think that it's correct, going about this the right way. And I was just notified that we do have a public comment in the group. So if you guys want to allow the public comment, you could. But yeah, do we know what the nature of the public comment is?
Chris would like to make a comment. That's kind of more of a general comment about the committee and with the planning commission and stuff.
If she's commenting as an individual, this
Yeah,
group
she's
could hear
an
it, but not if
individual.
she's as a planning commission.
Yeah, no, as an individual.
Would your group like to receive the comment? Okay. All right, let's go ahead.
But while we're waiting, so you,
Oh, I'm sorry, I keep hitting the wrong button. I really wanted to thank the ad hoc committee for their time in considering these numerous STR concerns and associated issues. In reviewing your previous ad hoc meetings. I've noticed the commission that I've been on has had really similar conversations about all these various issues. And you guys brought even up some that a few of us didn't think about. So that was great. And I thank you for that. And I agree as a citizen, with an STR cap and city council to revisit the cap, other, some time frame, accounting for Newberg's growth. But furthermore, I personally concur and agree as a citizen on many of the ad hoc committee's findings, thoughts, and concerns on these issues. And again, I thank you all for your time and that you have invested into the STR's recommendations going forward to City Council. And that is all. And I really wanted to thank you. That's all.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, you guys have a great evening. I'll mute.
2.
So I don't think there would be a problem as long as the correspondence is in a way that complies with open meeting laws. So staff will be able to draft up what we understand to be the recommendation, share it with the committee members, and then send your correspondence back to us, especially if there's any changes. If there's no changes, you're welcome to just reply and say, nope, looks good, or what have you. But again, just make sure that there's no communication between it amongst yourselves that would be a serial meeting. Town's just not that big. So to make sure that we're not doing anything we're not supposed to. So, and with that, we can keep things moving along. One of the, I guess, a parting question, depending on the city council's action, this could be a point where the committee gets sunsetted because it's an ad hoc committee if it's deemed that the purpose is done, and depending on how they want the scope of work for possible future work to go forward. So if that is what the city council chooses to do, I would just say thank you to all of you for doing this, because it's really appreciated. And I appreciate that all of you really hustled to kind of move it along and dig into the topic quickly. So thank you for everything you've done so far.
And thank you for putting together the white paper, because that was really a good directional, informational piece. So we weren't just operating on emotions.
Good. Glad to hear it. And then big kudos to James for being a big part of putting that together and jumping in to help with the committee. And as always for Faye for making sure that we can continue doing stuff like this. And because she does bring a lot from some of the other work she does, particularly with the business license program and some of the other activities too.
Well, and I just want to say it's been a pleasure working with all of you. And I feel proud of what we've done here. So
It's good.
Great.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It's been a great experience. You guys, city staff, you guys never disappoint. So you guys are amazing. And Beth, Dave, Peggy, Dawn, thank you a lot for your time and your knowledge. You guys are amazing. Peggy always. So yeah, you guys are great. It's been a good experience. So thank you.
All right. Well, if that's kind of most of the content, we have no next meeting on the schedule until I don't know, ever, maybe. And that's it.
Okay, one last question. So you're, just to make sure I understand, so you're gonna give us the criteria for approval that will go to city council. And then when it goes to city council, will there be a motion for us to put it to the community, or will that be something that Peggy or I has to bring up? How will that be addressed? The community input piece.
So the community input piece, staff is, you don't have to put that in there because I've already told you that staff is going to be making that recommendation as part of what we put forward to city council. What will go forward to city council will be, it'll lead with this because it's the newest thing that has come forward, and city council specifically formed this committee to create this recommendation. So what'll go forward to city council is that recommendation from your committee, and then all the things that have preceded it that kind of led the pathway. So we'll kind of do that as a reminder that we'd had the short-term rental paper. We'd had the planning commission recommendation. We had the statement from the police department, and we have now this recommendation here that's going to be the lead item. And so then usually the way the staff request for council actions, or city council letter are formatted is there's a recommendation. And so part of that recommendation is going to say, we recommend that you receive these new materials from your committee, receive these other materials that have been presented in the past, deliberate on those, and consider giving staff direction on how to move forward. And part of the direction on moving forward, there will be some discussion about what staff recommends based on this compilation of things. And the main one is that the city council takes some action, put kind of a scope of work together. So it's so that staff do enough, but not too much, whatever that feels like to city council. And that part of that enough, but not too much includes public input and public engagement.
I think we could concur that we would support you recommending that recommendation from
Oh.
staff for public input. So I think that would be good to let them know.
Do you want to make that part of your recommendation so that
Yes.
it's from you rather than from staff?
Yes.
Because it could be from this body that, you know, future
Yes.
work includes public outreach
Yes.
and engagement. Okay, yeah, if you all would like.
I'll make a motion that we instruct staff to have public input on our findings. And
All those in favor? Oh, I second it.
Oh, you said,
Yes. And then unanimous. So could you give us a timeline perhaps? So when will this go to city council? Like,
So we could probably get these formatted relatively quickly, especially if we send the email to you all, get comments back to make sure we got it right. We typically try and put things into the system at least 3 weeks prior to that, so that there's internal review. So finance has to look at something, other departments and whatnot. Sometimes they let us squeeze that a little tighter because it has to be available to the public no less than a week in advance. So that means we actually, only 2 of those weeks are internal review. So I could see, let me see, I'm gonna look at the city council calendar real quick.
Yeah.
5th and 19th is gonna be tight. So probably I would say the first one in March is what I would expect. So that's about 4 weeks from now. We could,
Say March fourth meeting. You guys wanted to, just show up so we can recognize you.
somewhere sunny, Eastern Oregon.
Costa Rica.
There you go. So yeah, we can shoot for March 4th tentatively. And I have let the city recorder and city manager know that we expected something to come forward sometime around then, but it really depended on this meeting and this body. If you were ready and had everything wrapped up, then we could do it at some point. So they should be ready for us. I don't think that's gonna be a problem.
then if we pass it and we direct you to do work to do outreach, what does that timeline look like? How long does that
I
normally
would
take?
really be coming off the top of my head. I
Yeah,
just don't
that's
know.
fine, that's fine. A
But
month,
we
2
can,
months?
we can try and what we'll try and do is in that RCA to city council, we can try and characterize what we expect it to include as a general timeline. Because we can probably block that out and say, you know, project initiation, engagement, first draft, maybe figure out if there's an engagement piece there, or at least an opportunity for comment or something. Or a sharing that first draft with city council, we get revisions and we bring it back again as a more honed piece of something. So we'll figure out exactly what we want to make that shape like. And the new community development director will be here by then, so he also gets to have an opinion on how that project gets shaped. And he may have experience with that too. So that's a plus.
When does he start?
He starts February 5th.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but yeah, we'll try and make sure we do something to
Okay.
characterize what that what staff recommends for that general project outline. And this was something that we mentioned in the city council received a 2024 work plan from the planning division. And this is one of the things we contemplated, but it was one of those because we're already kind of working on it, but it's really the pre-work effort because the work hasn't officially been assigned to us yet. Even though obviously we're here and we're talking to folks. So I'm happy to do it. So yeah, so that's what we're expecting.
Is there any other comment? Oh,
They too.
is there any other comments? I think if there isn't, then we could adjourn. Are we? Okay, I adjourn the meeting.
Thanks, everybody.
What?